Hello, Professor Dae Ryun.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah.
So, you are a professor at a really established university in South Korea, and we're,
Yes.
we're here to talk about sports and sports marketing with you.
Okay.
So, why don't you tell us how you got started? Talk to us about your journey.
Okay. I got started as a fan, so we'll talk about being a sports fan, but I'm also an academic, and so I teach marketing and I teach also online. So one of the courses that I teach on Coursera is international entertainment and sports marketing. So I've been a lifelong fan of sports, both as a spectator and as a participant. I am a twin, so I have a twin brother with whom I'm very competitive. And so we would, growing up, watch games together, and we would always root for different teams.
Sure.
And since I grew up, even though I'm South Korean, my father was a diplomat. So we spent many years outside of Korea, mostly in English speaking countries like the US and Canada.
Right.
So we would watch ice hockey and Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NFL, golf, everything except cricket. So I never got to to see cricket,
Right.
but I know about cricket. I've studied cricket as an academic, and athletically as a participant. I was always into golf and tennis, and I know that you are a tennis professional, so I followed tennis as well. So, and later on, after I became an academic, as one of the fields within marketing, I have studied sports marketing, the marketing of sports. But as we'll see later, it's broader than that. I think what makes sports marketing very interesting is that it's not just limited to the marketing of sports.
Sure. Sure. Interesting. So, did you play any sports growing up?
Yeah, again, I was on the high school sports team, I mean, golf team.
Mm-hmm.
So the only problem with golf is that no one gets injured. So I was on
Right.
the reserve team.
Right.
So we always practiced together, but
Right.
I never got to play. So that's one of the unfortunate memories of being on that golf team, that even though we practiced with the A team, the reserves never got to play because the A team players never got injured. I played a little tennis. I was never really that good, but again, that's probably the extent of my experience as an athlete on a sports team. So unlike you, I never got to reach
Right.
the pinnacle uh, of sports as a participant.
Sure. Sure. That's all right. I mean, as long as you're playing a sport, and I mean, you got to play golf as well, so that's great.
Yeah.
And so, why don't you talk to us a bit about the sports culture in South Korea? So, I mean,
Okay.
from India, I always like to know about different countries and the sports culture, especially over there, since these
Right.
countries do so well in the Olympics.
Right. Yeah. A good question. I think you mentioned before we went on air in the podcast that you follow the Korean football team or the soccer team.
Sure.
So Koreans are fanatical about a lot of things, but especially about sports. So you could, I think, argue that football to Koreans would be like cricket to Indians. So we have this intense following of certain sports,
Sure.
like football, like baseball, and a lot of it has to do with our rivalry against Japan.
Hmm.
So if you have Pakistan as a rival
Sure.
politically, but also in sports, I think we have Japan and China. So I would even argue as a business professor that the economic development in Korea was spurred on by the knowledge that Japan was richer
Mm-hmm.
than Korea for so long.
Sure.
And in Korea, we have to always beat Japan, no matter what that is,
Right.
but especially in sports. So Koreans are fanatical about certain sports like football, baseball. And during the Olympics, uh, badminton is one of the sports I know that India of late has been very good, especially PV Sindhu is very good. She's ranked #1. And she has a lot of sponsors, including Samsung. But Korea, I think they had a very good Olympics management program where they would focus on these non popular sports where they could be very competitive. So major example of that would be short track skating. So they've been dominant during the Winter Games. Think about it. I mean, Koreans and winter sports don't really go hand in hand, and yet uh, even though we haven't won any skiing medals, they've concentrated on sports where they can be very competitive. So again, I think sports and economic policy, in a way, have been very aligned in Korea, and
Right.
they've invested in them in these programs.
Right.
So we've been very successful in sports, despite the fact that, especially in the past, not so much now, but in the past, physically we would be so much smaller than Caucasian athletes, and yet
Sure.
we're able to compete in many of these sports despite these physical limitations.
Sure. Sure. So, how do you think, like when you mentioned economic policy, how do you think, sports glory impacts and benefits the nation?
Good question. I think sports, there is a passion for sports at a national level. So even when I think Korea was poor, I think sports and maybe entertainment, movies by design were what kept Koreans still happy.
Sure.
So I think that's why governments need to invest not only in sports but also in entertainment to make sure that the national sentiment of their citizens are at a certain level. So now that Korea is rich, richer certainly than before,
Right.
maybe that need is not as urgent. But nonetheless, you still have unhappy people. So I
Sure.
think that's why governments need to, and we see that especially in Europe, maybe not so much in the US, but in Europe where countries like England, the UK and Germany and Holland invest heavily in their football program, not just because of pride,
Right.
but I think because of some of the reasons that I just mentioned, because I think it's what keeps the national sentiment of a country at a reasonably high level.
Sure. Sure. Right. All right. Um, all right. So let's head on over to a bit of sports marketing. What is unique about sports marketing?
Okay, and I think I alluded to this before. The way I define sports marketing is that it's not just the marketing of sports, but also marketing through sports. And there's a difference, and it's not a semantic one. It's almost like thinking about two different pies, one being smaller. So the small pie with would be the marketing of sports, where you market, let's say, cricket, and you market, let's say, football, and so on. So EPL
Right.
Marketing itself would be the marketing of sports. But that's, I think, a very narrow perspective of sports marketing, because marketing through sports is where you can think of sports as being like a medium. So it's like television. And so through television, through the lens of television, you can broadcast a lot of different content. So sports has that power. So even if you're selling something which is unrelated, totally unrelated, and a good example of that might be, let's say, a bank. So let's say that you are HSBC,
Sure.
which is a financial product.
Right.
You can still use sports, such as by using, let's say, someone very trustworthy. So as a tennis player, I'm not sure who your idol is or idol was, but let's assume that it's Roger Federer, because for a lot of people, he's the epitome of class, the
Sure.
epitome of trust. So
Sure.
you can use him as a spokesperson, as the brand ambassador for that bank. So this goes, I think, to explain the popularity of someone like Michael Jordan. So I think he transcended sports, he transcended race, he transcended nationality. So through people like him, through people like, let's say, maybe PV Sindhu in India, I was doing some Googling about her, and realized that she's a spokesperson for a host of different brands,
Sure.
most of which are unrelated to sports.
Sure.
So in the case of Korea, that would be Kim Yeon-na. And she is the figure skating gold medalist. And she won her gold medal 12 years back. And yet she is still the #1 spokesperson in Korea for, again, a whole host of different products. So this is sports marketing in a nutshell.
Sure.
That the latter definition, allows sports to be that much more powerful, because you can embody a lot of the positive attributes of a sport or a personality, like a Federer, like a Kim Yeon-na, like a PV Sindhu,
Sure.
in your brand.
Sure. So I have a follow-up question to this, and I somehow came across a comment from you where you mentioned that you are a United fan.
Yeah.
And likewise, I'd like to know, what is it about football teams? United hasn't been doing really well for the last,
Right.
7, 8 years, 6, 7 years. And but still, they've been able to get these incredible sponsorship deals and
Right.
brand deals. And how is it that people still stick to the same club no matter what? I mean, a person who's genuinely invested in football will not change their favorite team. What is it
Right.
about sports that does that?
Yeah, good question. I think in the case of fans or followers in England, that's easy to explain, because you may have been brought up in, let's say, Manchester. You're maybe a whole generation, and going back to maybe your great grandfather
Sure.
Followed Manchester United.
Sure.
But I think it's actually amazing to see fans abroad being very similar. Fans in India, fans in Korea. And in Korea, it could be due to the fact that maybe one of the all-time greats, Park Ji-sung, played for Manchester United. And that explains why many people like me still follow Manchester United. But I think once you get to know the history of the club, there is this bond that develops with the team, irrespective of their current players, irrespective of their current performance. And we'll talk about this later, I think, when we get to storytelling.
Sure.
There's this rich history or story that surrounds a team like Manchester United, the New York Yankees, the Boston Celtics, and it's very rich.
Sure.
And I think that's what enamors people to a team like Manchester United, the fact that they had a manager like Sir Alex Ferguson, that they had this Munich Champions League disaster. And so when they win the Champions League, again, in a way,
Sure.
you feel that sense of gratification,
Right.
that reward that because of that history,
Right.
it means that much more
Sure.
to a team like that. So again, I don't think it's true that that kind of diehard. I talk about this in my course. This diehard following, it's not true of every team,
Right.
but it's true for certain teams. Because I think if I can just summarize, teams have a personality.
Sure.
It's like a kinship that you develop with people.
Sure.
So it's like being part of a family. And with that personality, again, even when they lose, they still have that enduring personality.
Right. Sure. Interesting. Interesting. So yeah, definitely. I mean, it's unbelievable actually. No matter what they do, they win or you lose. You know, you may probably not watch a few of their games. You may say, "I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm wasting my time
yeah,
watching them play. They're not playing well." But eventually,
yeah.
at the end,
I don't want to
you
name any
you-
names, but especially when we see Pogba play.
right,
Sometimes you wince. Why did he do that? And
right,
then sometimes he shows off his brilliance
right,
when he's into it.
right.
Then again, it makes you feel that much happier.
Sure, sure. So yeah, I was going to get to this a little later, but why don't
Yeah.
you? How is it different from entertainment marketing? How do you compare it?
Okay. Yeah. That's a good question. And let me see what I was going to say. I took down some speaking points here.
Sure.
Yeah, I think overall, in an overall sense, you can think of sports marketing as being a subset of entertainment marketing because sports can be very entertaining.
Sure.
So I think entertainment marketing is bigger, and within that you have sports marketing. So there's a huge overlap because it's a good pastime. It's a good way to kill time. It's a good way to divert yourself from the hustle and bustle of your daily life.
Yeah.
So that would be the similarity, and of course the other similarity related to that is that there's a lot of storytelling involved in both cases. So and one of the things to keep watch out for is that entertainment is evolving because of technology and how it's delivered. Whereas we just used to listen to it on radio or watch it on television, now because of things like your smartphone, you have all these different digital devices
Sure.
that have to be used to deliver entertainment content. And that's something that sports really has to be keen on. Take, for example, today I was following ice hockey. My favorite team is the Vancouver Canucks, and they're up 3-2 now versus the St. Louis Blues. And so I was having lunch, but still able, because of my smartphone, to follow what was happening and even able to see video highlights.
Sure.
So again, to keep the enthusiasm of fans, both entertainment and sports have to become very high tech. It's the delivery of content. I think that's what they both have in common.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to evolve with the technology that is developing, whether it's AR or VR. And at some point, we will be able to experience both with newer technology. I think the only difference between the two would be that we have a common saying in Korea that sports is unscripted drama.
Right.
I like that, unscripted drama. So you never know with sports how it's going to end.
Sure.
So, which is both good and bad, because your team can lose.
Sure.
Your team can lose.
Sure.
Or the game can be very boring.
Sure.
Whereas as a filmmaker, we really make sure that the production, the pre-production, is just so right that that there are no mistakes. But that's not true of sports. So that's why producing sports events live is so hard. That's why if I had another challenge that I wanted to attempt, it would be maybe to direct a sports event, because you really have to be fast on your feet. You have to be able to fill up dead air time. So again, it's a double-edged sword, I think. Sports.
Sure. So I feel, there's a distinct, difference. So wherein the moment the sports event, the live event, the football match is done with, if you haven't watched it, the value goes down by, 95%.
Right.
But with a movie, it doesn't matter if you haven't watched the same movie. I'll give Parasite as an example. I didn't go to the theaters.
Right.
I still haven't watched the movie. I know it won the Oscar. But if I want, I can switch it on in the next 1 hour and watch it, and it'll have the same impact to me as anyone else who watched it probably 6 months back. But with football, or with any sport, the moment the live action is over, regardless, I mean, it's first of all, it's very hard to not know the score once it's done. Right. Once it's done, nobody watches a repeat. Hardly. Maybe you can watch the Munich match on repeat, but the general Premier League matches, nobody does that. So there's
No, I agree. And so sometimes I try as hard as I can, and of course it's not easy, but if I'm watching something on delay, because for example, a match playing at night in Europe would be the wee hours of the morning here in Korea.
Sure.
So if I'm watching something on delay, I try to close off all channels so that I won't be exposed to the score. But you're right. There is a difference between watching something live and something later on tape. Yeah, I agree. And even more so watching it there.
Right.
So to be at a stadium, watching something, and I can count maybe on both hands I'm old enough to have watched all these famous players. For example, you mentioned the 2000 World Cup. So to watch Zidane, the French player, this is when he was playing on the national team, live, is just a totally different experience.
Yeah.
And I'm going to really date myself. This was, I think, maybe a year before he retired, but I watched Bjorn Borg play to watch one of his topspin backhands live at Flushing Meadow. Yeah. That was just something to behold.
Right.
That you cannot capture on TV. Right. At least not now.
Sure. So now that you mentioned it, I know I give, never mind. There is a huge difference between, an in-person watching it live and watching it through the screen. So like you mentioned, how do brands perceive it? Obviously the screen doesn't have the same impact as an in-person watching the match live, right? So how do sponsors gauge and compare what they probably want to invest in, right? So especially in these situations where, okay, you aren't getting 80,000 people or
Right,
75,000 regular, ticket holders to the stadiums, but
right,
maybe you can get 1.5 lakh or 1.5 million people to watch the matches through the
right,
TV because
right,
everyone's on lockdown. So
right, right,
how do
right.
sponsors gauge these? So do you think they prefer to have it online?
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of uh, leagues now and brands as well, they have to grapple with. And I think the fact that a lot of leagues, such as the NBA and such as the NHL, are using so-called bubbles without fans
Yeah,
to continue, and the European Football Association as well. They're continuing with their Champions League. I think maybe it's just wishful thinking, but there are pluses and minuses. There's of course a big minus. If you want fans, you definitely should use them. But even without fans, just the fact that people can watch it on television, I think the onus will be on the telecast to make sure that the excitement of the event is still very high.
sure.
So maybe the broadcaster, they have to maybe put in a little more extra effort to make it.
Yeah,
It could be in the camera angles. Make sure that you don't show all the empty seats.
sure.
And so that's where I think a filmmaker, as a filmmaker, I know the effect of different camera angles and so on.
Right.
So again, I think that there are a lot of techniques that enable a broadcaster to overcome that kind of lack of not having spectators at
Sure.
venues like that.
Sure.
Uh, and I can also argue that for certain sports, I mentioned that I played golf, and I've watched Tiger Woods play twice,
Wonderful.
and it was not a fun experience because there you have too many people,
Okay.
too many people. So in a
Okay.
way, golf is a sport which is kind of odd. Maybe it's unique in the sense that it's better watching it on television as opposed to watching it
Wow.
at the venue,
Right.
because there's a lot of walking around. There's a lot of fighting that you have to do to
Sure.
be able to go up and close to a star player like Tiger Woods. So I think as a broadcaster, you have to maximize the advantages that you have,
Sure.
such as being able to have a close up and being able to show a lot of different screens at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at the venue, you can't do that,
Right.
obviously.
Right. Right. So yeah, I personally felt, I don't know, maybe some others may feel it is phony, but I personally felt that the moment they introduced the sounds, the fan sounds, the experience was much better for me.
Right, exactly,
Right.
exactly. So I think that's a very good point. If you make it from a modal standpoint, that would be the academic word, not just the site, but as you just mentioned, adding in the sound of the fans, that will heighten the excitement of an event, a
Sure.
sporting event. Yeah.
Sure. So what do you think sponsors are going to do in post-COVID world? You think they're going to invest the same amounts in sports, considering these measures?
Yeah, I think the jury is still out because I think they're it's almost on a maybe sustained mode now. They just want to carry over, make sure that fans don't lose interest. So
Sure.
I suspect that many teams are losing money. So even with broadcast revenues,
Sure.
there will be a lot of um, money lost, I think, this season. But I think the hope is that in the long run, that the pandemic will subside. But if it continues, I have some concerns about the sustainability of maintaining this so-called bubble mode, whether without the spectators, even with the sound,
Right.
that the fan interest in these events will be still high. And I think this holds true for brands as well. So my expectation is that they will continue to sponsor some athletes, like a CR7, like Cristiano Ronaldo.
Sure.
He will have no problem getting sponsored. But you'll have this maybe a polarization where, and this is true even for retired athletes, like the ones that I mentioned here in Korea, Kim Yeon-na, and maybe in the case of cricket, someone like MS Dhoni. I think he will have no problem getting sponsored because, again, he's a proven endorsee.
Sure.
So again, I think, but for up and coming athletes, I think money will be very hard to come by if this pandemic continues. Yeah.
Sure. And especially so, even at the grassroots, the fundings may probably reduce as well, right?
Yeah. So I think, well, but it's not just sports. I think because sports is just a subset of the whole economy. So the whole economy now, as you know, especially in India, most companies are suffering.
Sure.
And so they don't have the luxury of investing in what may be perceived as being maybe a non-essential investment, such as sports marketing.
Right. All right. So why don't you tell us something about, like we spoke about, storytelling?
Okay.
Sports.
Yeah. Storytelling, simply put, is crafting a story which has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So we can think about sports movies, such as Rocky. And it was such a popular movie that it ended up having, and still in its current iteration of Creed, it's up to its 10th movie. So a story is something which I think is easily relatable to people. It's very compelling. People remember it and talk about it many years after having seen it. So that's why the same can be true if we apply storytelling to sports, and that's why I mentioned the Manu plane crash. There was a movie about that plane crash, and it's a very moving movie. And although I don't know cricket, I have seen Lagan. So Lagan.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I'm a huge Amir Khan fan.
Right.
So I've watched that. I've watched The Three Idiots, and I've watched some of his other films. So anyway, so again, even though I don't know cricket, just watching that movie inspired me to know more about the rules of cricket.
Sure.
And so again, storytelling is something that I think, even though sports is unscripted, as I said earlier, I think maybe even after the fact, you try to make a story out of historic teams. For example, I watched the Last Dance Michael Jordan series. And I used to be a huge Michael Jordan fan, but I soured on him after his Hall of Fame speech.
Mm-hmm.
But I've become a big fan again
Sure.
after seeing this movie.
Sure.
Of course, it's very hagiographic, but again, watching it and seeing the context of the challenges that he faced, especially after his father died, and because back then I didn't know why he would opt to play baseball
Sure.
while he's in the middle of winning 4 championships.
Yeah.
But again, through that story telling, it humanizes
Sure.
the events related to a sporting event.
Sure.
So I know India has been so successful recently in the World Cup with cricket. So you may have athletes, again, like MS Dhoni. There may be certain facets beyond what he did on the field
Sure.
that helped him perform as well as he did
Right.
on the pitch.
Right.
That only can be told through a story.
Right.
So it's not just limited to when that sports event is occurring. It can be done afterwards
Sure.
as well. So I think that's why storytelling is so important. And I think certain outlets, for example, if I can plug the New York Times, because I'm an avid reader, they write pages and pages about the athlete as opposed to just posting a score. For example, yesterday, the Portland Trailblazers beat the LA Lakers.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
there was a story about Damian Lillard, but more about his friend from college.
Right.
So it only mentioned that he played well, that he scored, 31 points.
Sure.
But there were 3 pages on his friend.
Sure.
So it humanized Damian Lillard
Right.
and the type of person he is.
Sure.
And how his tenacity, his perfectionism. So again, it humanizes the athlete. I think that's the power of storytelling in sports.
Sure. So I don't. I'm trying to present an argument. It's not. I'm not trying to contradict the point.
Yeah.
When you start humanizing players and athletes, like
Right.
let's say through social media, where you cover their
Right.
day throughout the day, what they're doing, what they're eating and what they're doing throughout the day, you start humanizing them. Does that take away a bit of their shine or a bit of their mystery element, where you could say probably 15 years ago, you wouldn't know what Rafa Nadal does throughout the day,
Right.
and they just
Right.
seem like a mystery. They seem like gods, like out of this.
Right.
And now suddenly you
Right.
can see him throughout the day and what he's doing, and he appears really human. He appears like us. Maybe he's way more talented and way more hardworking than 99.99% of the people in the world. But
Right.
don't you think in some way it takes off the mystery element that
It does, but I don't think. I think it's both good and bad. So I think as an athlete, that's something you have to be very careful about. You don't want 24/7 coverage of your private life,
Sure.
but just to allow people into your lives, to show them that, again, you're, and I think this is in a way related to what I talk about in my Coursera courses. The way I define marketing is I use a Korean word nunnopi, and what nunnopi means is eye level. So you want to see your fans at an eye level,
Sure.
not as a god, because I think in the past we tended to idolize
Sure.
these people. So I think the power of social media is that there's an academic term called parasocial identity, which means that you almost see them as being an equal.
Right.
So you become almost their friends, and that is the power of social media. But it has a double-edged
Sure.
element where you don't want to be too public with everything about
Yeah.
your private life, and you also want to be very authentic. So you don't want to, uh, and I think this is something that even followers have to be aware of when they follow their favorite athlete on Instagram or Facebook, which is you don't want to be influenced uh, too much to the extent that you buy everything that they wear, because
Yeah.
sometimes it's not sincere, it's not authentic, because
Sure.
they're being sponsored, they're getting paid to wear
Right.
something.
Right.
So that's where uh, I think the athletes have to be honest in admitting that they're being sponsored to
Sure.
wear something, and so that it is a form of advertisement as
Sure.
opposed to something that they would do even without having to get paid for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, talk to us about Nike and how do they
Yeah.
get right all the time? With their videos, it's incredible. I mean, of course, I mean, we do know stories, being in the sports industry, we do know stories about the stuff they do in China and all those things. But
Yeah.
as when it comes to sports marketing, always on top, always number one. Many other sports, there's Adidas, there's Under Armour, but they don't come close to the way Nike, with they don't come close to Nike's videos.
Right. And I'll tell you a little story since I've been talking about storytelling.
Yeah.
I had the great fortune of visiting Nike headquarters in Beavertown, Oregon, which is near Portland. And this was only 2 years back. In fact, less than 2 years back. And they call it a campus because it looks literally like a college campus. And what struck me about Nike was that they have this air of authenticity. So even though it's a big brand and they market brands for profit, nonetheless, they do care about their athletes. And they have this mantra, which is that if you have a body, you are an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're more familiar with Just Do It, but that is their mantra. And that speaks to the inclusivity that they have about what defines athleticism.
Sure.
And I think they support Paralympics as well. And so I think Nike really just gets it. They understand what the zeitgeist of a country is, and we see that reflected in their sponsorship of Colin Kaepernick during
Yeah.
his knee down during the Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And let me give you another example, which is at Nike campus, I saw this poster, which wasn't very big, but it had the signatures of all of their so-called sponsored athletes.
Yeah.
And by sponsored, this included people that they just gave some money to, not like $1 million sponsorship levels, but someone that they were helping um, uh, uh, to just get by. And so I just happened to spot Rafa Nadal's signature on that poster. And it was so nondescript because it was so small.
Right.
I had to find it.
Sure.
And they didn't emphasize it. They didn't put it, they didn't frame that.
Sure.
And right next to it was just a signature of a college, a high school student.
Okay.
So that speaks to their their inclusivity
Sure.
philosophy that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So Nike is a very humble company, even though they make a lot of money.
Sure.
It's a very famous brand. But you don't have the type of glamour that dressed. It's not all dressed up,
Right.
and that's what I felt on that campus. It has a very low profile, laid back
Right.
kind of attitude.
Yeah. Interesting. So maybe that's what helps them connect to everyday people.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So wrapping things up, how do fans feature in? How important are they? And how can they
Yeah.
contribute here?
Okay. Well, of course, fans are consumers of sports. So without fans, you wouldn't have sports. So I think we have to be always cognizant of that fact, and we have to do proper service to the fan. And as a marketer, I think we have to know who your fans are. And so we were talking about Manchester United. So if you look at the English Premier League, they know, and the same is true of the Primera Liga, that they have fans everywhere.
Sure.
So it's not just paying attention to their hometown or their national fans, but their international fans as well.
Sure.
And it should be reflected in maybe the kind of languages that are used in websites. It could be, for example, we have a star player, Son Heung-min, who plays for Tottenham Hotspurs. So I think they have a lot of content in Korean because he is such a star player.
Yeah.
And they realize that a lot of Koreans go to England to see him play. A lot of Koreans watch him play on TV.
Yeah.
So we have to always be mindful of the fans that we have.
Sure.
And make sure that the nunnopi, the eye level matching, is there.
Right. So, okay, you mentioned I've always taken his name as Heung-min's son, so I was a little confused what you're talking about.
No, so, yeah, well, because we use the surname first, but of course he's Heung-min's son, and he's wonderful. He is just absolutely incredible.
Right. Glad he's recovered from his injury.
Yeah.
There's a really bad one. And
did you see that goal that he scored against Burnley? That when he raced down, I think about 80 meters.
Right. Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. So South Korea keeps producing, these Premier League stars once, very often. Park Ji-sung and then Sung Min. Really, it's great.
Yeah. No, I think if I can just comment on Korean football, I think a lot of Koreans don't even know this. I'm not sure how many Koreans may listen to this podcast, but I would argue even to my compatriots that they should be so grateful because we've been so lucky that we've had such players. Because if you look at the number of registered, I was doing some research on Korean football, and I was shocked to find out that we only have, I think, less than, I forget what the number was, and this was maybe more than 10 years back, so it could be higher now, but it was under 5,000 registered football players in Korea.
Right.
So for a country of 50 million people, that's tiny.
Sure.
But if you look at a country like Uruguay, which has a population of 3 million, they have 300,000 registered football players.
Sure.
So for them to play well, it's a no-brainer.
Right.
But for South Korea to be so dominant for so long in football, not only in Asia, but to beat Germany,
right.
and to have that run that we did in 2002. Oh, we are just so lucky. We got spoiled. Koreans are so spoiled that if we don't do well in football, They criticize the national
Right.
team, but again,
Right.
it's not easy. I mean, even European teams fail to make it to the World Cup.
Of course.
Yeah. So we are really blessed to
Sure.
have these once in a lifetime generational players like Park Ji-sung. And I can name you like 5 of these players that
Sure.
played in 2002.
Sure.
And even the current generation now with Hwang Hee-chan, who plays for Leipzig. And we have, I think, about maybe 2 more. So we have 4 or 5 players who are really, really good. So Son Heung-min gets all the press.
Sure.
Well, we have about 5 players. So I'm very optimistic about our chances even for the next World Cup.
Sure. The good thing, I mean, what's interesting is, you know, when you compare, of course, there's 100,000 different factors why why Indian football hasn't taken it to the next level.
Right.
I mean, you haven't produced Premier League players, Premier League level
Right.
players. But
Right.
the interesting thing is, you know, we Indians in general, we say that it's all physicality and the Premier League, the players are just
No.
strong.
I would disagree. I would
Exactly.
disagree. Yeah.
Exactly.
There's a great documentary on Netflix on the teams that have won the World Cup.
Right.
And there's one on Spain.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't watched that, watch it, because there they talk about how Spain had that same mentality, but it changed when they picked players like Xavi and Iniesta, very small players, role players.
Sure.
So again, it takes a team to win a team sport like
Definitely.
football.
Definitely. Yeah. So wonderful, Professor. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And it was great talking to you. And
likewise.
I'm sure the listeners and I myself have learned a lot from this, and really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And let me tell your listeners that you can take my courses on Coursera.
Sure.
There are 6 available, including the one that I mentioned, which you have taken, which is International Entertainment and Sports Marketing. But I'll also write and direct movies. So I will send you a link to my movies, especially one which have won many awards at international film festivals. So you can watch my movies as well.
Wonderful. So I will have all the links on the show notes and in all the social media channels, so you can watch the movies, and also please do take the amazing courses that Professor Dae Ryun has on Coursera. And I assure you, I've done it myself, and it's wonderful. And
thank you. Thanks for the plug.
Sure. And also on LinkedIn, how can they get it? They can get in touch with you as well, right?
Yeah. Let me see if I can. Hold on. Okay. Let me send you my LinkedIn address, and maybe you can put that on your show note. Yeah.
Wonderful. So yeah, you can get in touch with Professor Dae Ryun through LinkedIn as well. And thank you so much, Professor, and hope to have you back with us to discuss some other topics in the future.
It would be my pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.